When I was in second grade, my mom took me to the hairdresser and had my long curly hair cut into a pixie. That's the first time I remember feeling that change was traumatic. Well, the only constant in life is change, and like it or not, we all experience major life transitions and haircuts. My guest today, Sheila Darling, talks about embracing change with joy. She's a life transition coach and has a lot to share on the topic. So let's get started. Welcome to the Youthful Older Yogi podcast. I'm MJ Waddell, your yogi host and founder of Share Yoga. I've been practicing, teaching, and loving yoga for over 25 years. I'm an advocate of movement, creativity, and staying healthy in mind and body after 50. And so are my guests. It's never too late to start, and there's a lot of healthy years ahead. So let's start now. I've known Sheila for a number of years. I didn't know she was a life transition coach, so that was something new I learned about her. And she's going to be sharing a lot about how we can embrace change with joy. There she is. We're always praying. Be present. That's a beautiful shot. And we're going to be welcoming her in just a minute. She's also certified in a lot of other therapies and disciplines. She's a mom, a wife, a yogi, a great human being, and has a lot to share with us today. Now, let's finally welcome our guest, Sheila Darling. There you are.
Here
Sheila,
I am.
Sheila, thank you so much for taking the time to share your knowledge and being present on the Youthful Older Yogi. I'm very, very glad you're here. You have quite a history with multiple degrees after I researched you, and there's a lot of transitions in your history. And
Yes.
can you share with our listeners just a little bit about how you came to be a life transition coach?
So my earlier career was as a psychotherapist, and I was exposed to the model of coaching about 5 years ago. And I loved that it was more collaborative and interactive, and we work as a team toward goals. In therapy, you do a lot about history and you really go back in time and try to resolve those issues and get someone functioning in the moment. And my thought process is that if someone picked up the phone, they're probably functioning in the moment.
Yeah.
And so we don't do a lot of that. Some of that, of course, comes up because it's important, but we don't try to process all of that. We really work on where we're at now and what we want to be working on in the future.
Awesome. You just had a milestone birthday. Happy birthday.
Thank
If you
you.
want to share what it is, you can. I won't. I know some women, I always celebrate the age because I think at least we get another birthday. A lot of people don't. So
I celebrate my birthday for a month. I advertise it the month before. Like
good.
I'm big, big, big on my birthday. I turned 60.
Happy birthday.
I had a big goal to travel 60 days out of the year. And I believe I've already done that this year, like half
Awesome.
the year.
That's a great
So
goal.
that's super fun.
Thinking back, because I remember when I thought of a 60-year-old, I like, oh my God, that's ancient. And so do you still consider 60 as old, or how did you envision yourself at that age?
So logically, being 60, I know it's not old, right? I know many people and how I feel physically and emotionally, right? I think mentally feel like I'm 16, but some days. And physically I feel well, but my mother died when she was 62. So I always have had like a meter in
Yes.
my head, right? And even now I can still acknowledge, right, that sometimes I am like, oh no, I'm going to do this because I only have 2 years left, right? So I still have that mindset sometimes. My mother was very old at 62. Me, no.
Yeah, I completely relate to that because my mom passed when she was 57. And I also held that as a marker. I'm 63 now, and my older sister also, that was a marker for her. And my younger sister's not quite 57 yet, but it does. It's like, wow. And it was much too young to die, in my opinion. So yes, it's a different perspective now that you've lost someone that you think would be live, to be much older, or hoping that they would be much older.
I imagine that when I turn 62, right? And I'll be counting the months and the days, right?
Yes,
Until,
yes,
and then I'll be like, oh, okay, so I passed that.
yes, yes.
So,
It'll
so
be
there,
different. Yeah.
there's probably a little bit of fear around that, or,
Hmm.
we'll see what comes up when it's
Yep.
happening.
Yeah. And now, as much as many of us resist change, we know that it's inevitable. We have these natural transitions of, retiring, aging, becoming empty nesters, those expected changes. We all expect that. We know those are going to happen. You're somewhat prepared for them. We think we're somewhat prepared for them. But what about those unexpected and unwanted transitions that happen, suddenly, like a layoff, a divorce, or a pandemic that completely change the face of the globe? So how the hell can we come out of those situations with optimism or grace?
Ah, yes, grace is a good one. So MJ shared, some of the questions beforehand. So I did have a chance to
Hmm.
think about it. So the goal isn't really optimism, right? The goal is acceptance.
Hmm.
And I love the word grace. So in my practice, I do presence, power, belief. So we spend a lot of time on presence, living in the present. We practice a lot of mindfulness. And with that comes acceptance of what's happening now, and not so much being in the past or the future. And that can bring grace,
Hmm.
right? The impermanence of everything,
Yeah.
right? The acceptance that every single thing is impermanent.
Hmm.
I mean, an example of this, I was in a yoga class this morning, and it's like almost the easiest yoga, right? It's not the one where like you're laying down almost asleep, but it's the next step up from that.
Yeah.
And we were in a hip thing. And of course, now that I'm 60, I have a hip thing. And she just kept saying, you don't want to have numbness, right? But if it's uncomfortable, see if you can stay in it, because it's not going to last. And that is truly how I try to think of everything,
Yes.
literally everything. This is not going to last. And we are, our emotions last 90 seconds. An emotional response to something lasts 90 seconds. It continues to last when you overthink it, right?
Yes.
So if
Yes.
we can stay where we are in the current moment, then there's so much less suffering, right?
And
We
I
bring
like
on
that
our
you
own
said,
suffering.
yes, and I like that you said acceptance, because just using the pandemic as a example, there was no non-acceptance of it because it was happening to the world. So you had to accept it. And that was very uncomfortable for many, many people. And the acceptance that, yep, this is happening, and you may have lost your job may have been better. Who know, it's all of this. So that acceptance piece, I think, is very key. Like, because when you fight something, when you resist something, it just becomes greater, I think.
Yes, all stress, I tell people, all stress comes from being in resistance as opposed to acceptance. And we can talk about the pandemic. You can talk about any
And
kind of thing that's happening in life, and you don't have to accept it just because it actually is happening. You
mhm,
could be in denial, right? I mean,
true.
even with the pandemic, plenty of people denied that that was even a thing,
Oh, yes, I know. I was a contact tracer. I called people
right?
that were sick with COVID, and they're like, I don't have COVID. I'm
Right.
fine. Like, okay,
And
all right.
I mean, other life transitions, empty nesters. So how many people resist that? My daughter, my youngest, hallelujah, just graduated from high school. The amount of parents that were very distraught over their child graduating
Mm-hmm,
and moving out and moving on with their lives. And I just have a whole different perspective, probably because I have a lot of kids.
mm-hmm.
So I've been parenting for a very long time, but when they move out, it's the best.
Yeah, yes.
It's
It's
the
just
best.
perspective. Yes. So, Sheila, you shared with me that you were diagnosed with osteoporosis
Mhm.
and was told that you shouldn't practice yoga. And I can talk a lot about that, but I want you to share with our listeners talk about how that experience affected you? And I know you've been a yoga practitioner for many years, and you love it. And when someone tells you you can't do something, can you just share a little bit about that experience? And how are you doing actually? How are you dealing with it?
I think I'm doing fine. I had a DEXA scan or whatever,
Yeah.
so that they do, and I got the numbers, and I, of course, immediately freaked out, right? Because, and I think I freaked out because I couldn't get in with the specialist for 3 months, right? And I have my own thoughts about our broken healthcare system. So that was a little frustrating, but I decided to do my own research. I bought a mini trampoline and I've been rebounding, which is supposed to be good for your bones. And, being 60, and although I don't think it's old, I think it's not common to not be on any medication. And I'm not. I've never taken any medication. I feel good about that. So I started taking some vitamin D and, some different kind of supplement, things like that. Nothing crazy. And I looked at no yoga, no twisting, no forward bending. And I was like, so I went to yoga, and of course, immediately I went right up to the instructor. And I'm like, I just found out I have osteoporosis. Do you know what I can do? And she was like, right? She's like, I have no idea, but I will check.
Yes.
Right? She made it a point. She's like, I will find out, blah, blah, blah.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so I was very reluctant to go and very reluctant to do anything in my yoga class. And then I just decided that I was going to treat it like when you get pregnant and people tell you not to work out unless you've always worked out, right? You don't want to start anything new. So that's what I decided I was going to do with this. And so then I just decided to do that. And so now I go to yoga and I'm not nervous about it anymore. But the initial was,
yeah, it's when you get any type of news saying you can't do something you love, it's jolting, and just for our listeners that may know someone or been diagnosed with osteoporosis or osteopenia. So I follow, his name is Dr. Lauren Fishman, and has an international reputation as a back pain specialist and a diagnostician. He's a pioneer in lots of disorders, and he has written a couple books on osteoporosis and done major studies. He's authored more than 90 academic journal articles, 10 books. He's really a necessary resource if you're a yoga teacher or you practice with osteoporosis. There's a whole thing you can watch for free. You can twist. You just have to be aware of the twist. It's same with pregnancy. You don't lay on your belly. Of course you don't lay on your belly. And the studies show that they took groups, and the people that did, one took whatever the medication is. I don't know the name of it. Boniva or something, I think it's called. They had two medications. That was one study group. The other study group just did yoga. And the people that did yoga had less hip fractures, less spinal fractures without any medication, and they were doing yoga. The other group was not doing yoga, just taking, and some of the medications have some side effects. And it needs to be studied more, but they don't teach yoga teachers, which makes me mad, about people with special conditions. Because people have hip replacements all the time, knee replacements all the time, shoulder, rotator cuff, wrist, everything. And a lot of the yoga teachers, a 200-hour training is like an appetizer. You don't learn all of these things. So I'm glad you went back, Sheila, and I'm glad you're doing yoga, and really, your body the best, and you can, as long as you're aware of it, and I'll send that resource. It's a really, really good resource.
I appreciate that resource. And I think, that brings up just one other thing I wanted to say was this whole trusting ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
We're so not used to being quiet, right? I mean, you talked about one of my certifications, right? I'm a mindfulness meditation teacher.
Mm-hmm.
And in the quiet is where we really get to know ourselves, right? It's where we can think and feel and advocate. I did get in with the specialists, and I advocated for myself for no medication. They were not happy at all. Brought in the supervisor, the whole thing. I really believe in how I feel, and that yoga helps with my balance. So hopefully I won't fall.
Correct.
Right. And I didn't let them scare me. There was some scare tactics, you know.
Yeah. And
And
you have to do so much research. And I'm glad you did that.
I
Yeah.
did.
I could go on and on about it, about the
Yeah,
healthcare, because not that yoga is a be all end all and you're going to, cure everything. But when you have body weight and even you're doing a plank pose, you're creating stress on your bones to make them stronger. So you
right.
don't have to do crazy stuff for bone health. It's quite basic. And there are more falls and people that fall that have hip or spinal injuries that take up more of the medical, the money. There's more of that than anything. And that's where if people start practicing yoga or some type of discipline that includes balance and strength and flexibility, that's up balanced together, then and their range of motion, and then they won't be as likely to fall and go into
Right.
this downward spiral of, oh, now I can't do this and now I can't move. And now, I mean, movement is so paramount.
Hmm.
Mindful movement, not just throwing yourself out there. So you can choose which transition was your hardest. All right, so all five of you, and it seems like loss of a loved one. Yeah.
So
So,
what makes it harder? I would love to ask this question for everyone because they're all stressful life events, right? And I personally put sudden loss of a job,
mm-hmm,
right? Although in the scope of what's more devastating, obviously, is the loss of a loved one.
mm-hmm,
But I think for me, it was the acceptance with
mm-hmm.
the loss of my mom, even the acceptance of when I got divorced. But damn it, I got fired from a job and I was in so much resistance.
Yeah. Well, I'm used to
I
losing a
was
job.
angry, 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 angry. And that is what made it harder. And
Yeah.
in the awareness of that, now I can use in the future, knowing that
Yeah,
even the
I think
anger didn't
it's
last.
all, relative and what your experience, what your life experience is with these sudden transitions. Does anyone want to share their difficult transition with Sheila? Carolyn? Yeah, go ahead, Carolyn.
So retirement, believe it or not, was a tough transition. And I think it made it harder because my husband retired in 2017. I retired in the summer in June of 2019, and we moved into our place that we're in now, which was wonderful. And then the pandemic hit, and that was a huge transition for me. And I had no idea. I had no idea what that was going to be like and how hard that was going to be. But I began some things that Sheila had mentioned, actually. I began being quiet, having quiet time, and having my own space.
And what did you retire from, Carolyn, if you don't mind?
I was a teacher assistant. My last role was a one-on-one aide with a special ed middle schooler.
Mm-hmm. Did you have something in mind or what retirement was going to look like?
I had many goals.
Mm-hmm.
I'd had a plan.
And then the pandemic screwed it all
And
up,
then the
huh?
yeah,
Yeah. And how are you now?
great.
Good.
Because I have continued and jumped on my plan, back on my plan. I've learned how to be more patient than people say I already am. But because of how things happened, I think I was very anxious and excited to have things happen quicker. And they didn't, but some things I approached and needed to move forward and reach out to those people and things that I wanted to do, which was all movement, by the way, working with and helping others. But
Yes.
anyway, I followed my plan, and some because I took care of it and followed through with it. And one of my favorite is still in the works. Our neighbor down the street has horses. And one of my goals was to meet someone and find someone that has horses to help and learn how to take care of them and possibly ride and take a lesson. And that came out of the blue because it came up on a Facebook page that where our community is on down here. And I thought, okay,
That's
it's
wonderful.
all good. Yeah.
And Sheila, what do you think about it's to me, it's just manifesting, right? And Carolyn's one of the lucky ones that actually moved forward? Why do you think so many people, thank goodness, Carolyn, you did, and I'm so happy that that's happening, but you're manifesting it and moving forward. But why do you think, Sheila, that so many people get stuck and they can't move forward?
Oh, well, I think that it's the expectation, right? When you talk about retirement, I think for a very long time, people think about what they're going to do in their retirement, right? What am I going to do? And you clearly you moved into the woods, you did all this other stuff, and then when something changes, it's that whole expectation. And when we expect things to go a certain way and then they kind of veer off, we have an emotional response to that. That comes from the thought that it's not happening the way it was supposed to. It sounds like, Carolyn, you allowed things to unfold as they did, and that you had hope, right? And you had belief that this isn't going to be forever and it's going to all work out, right? You just didn't know like how to get from A to B initially. And you did a lot of work. I know you. So you did a lot of work in that period. But when you retire and then a pandemic hits and now you're home with your husband, hello. Yeah, that's the piece that was the most difficult. You couldn't even go anywhere or do anything. And here you both are when you're used to working full time and now you're both in the house together. My husband retired in January and I'm like, don't you have somewhere to go every day? Don't you have something to do? Go. So
Yeah.
I can totally relate to that one. But I think that a lot of times when something happens different, MJ, than what we were expecting, or I think you asked earlier if we know that we need to do something, but we're resistant to doing it. A lot of that comes, I think, from a perfectionist mindset. We're not even perfection, but wanting to do it right. Some fear of what other people are going to think. Right? Starting something new or, anything like that.
It's just like when we started and I screwed up the video. I've done it 3 other times before. It doesn't bother me anymore because it's just life and no one's going to probably even remember it except me tonight in bed going, wow, I know how to do that.
You know what? It brings us all back to just being human. Like nobody wants to come see me for coaching if I'm perfect, right? Nobody wants to share, difficult things because I think with perfection comes maybe this idea of judgment. So no, I think that was very human of you.
Yeah, it is.
It's just kidding. Sorry.
Yeah, no,
sorry, I had to throw an F-bomb in there because you said we were gonna.
Of course you do.
And MJ, you made me feel better.
Oh,
I am not the sharpest tool in the shed when it comes to technology. So.
Well, I've learned a lot thanks to Andrea, who's taught me a lot. And even talking about starting something new. And now we're going to start a podcast. It's all uncharted territory. And is there fear? Of course. But to me, it's more excitement because the learning, as the older I get, I just want to learn more and more. And I don't want to be left behind. I don't want to say, oh, I can't figure it out. I can if I really want to. You can't, and it might take the patience aspect, Carolyn, that you talked about, that's the time where I have to get quiet and just be patient. It'll all work out. And I'm better at it now. I think when I was younger, I wasn't, but now it's like it happens as long as I'm manifesting it and moving forward like you did, it will all work out.
But I also was given the tools.
Yes.
As I was reaching out, I was also reaching out for help.
Yes.
For tools that I needed.
Good. Well, I'm glad you did.
Yeah. So I am too. And I'm very grateful.
Yeah. And that's another for our listeners who's listening to the replay. If you feel stuck, there are places to reach out. We have a guest on right now that you can reach out to. You can reach out
that's
to her.
why that's one of the reasons I'm here.
Awesome. Good. And you can reach out to me and take a yoga practice and I'll teach you how to be quiet.
I think I've jumped on a website already.
Oh, good. Thank you. Well, thank you, Carolyn, for sharing. I appreciate that sharing. And I just want to say, when I was researching this, there's 2 types of stress, which I was not aware of. There's distress and eustress. if you play Scrabble, if you have the word eustress, people will be very, very impressed. So there's de-stress and there's eustress. I'd never heard of eustress. So I researched it and I kind of got pissed off that there wasn't more talk about it. It's the good side of stress that motivates and energizes you to make a change. And I'd never heard of it. And then there's this other side-by-side comparison that Andrea is going to put up. So you could see the sad face on the distress that we've all felt at different times. The pandemic, who didn't feel like that? It's like all of us were feeling very distressed. And then eustress, it's a feeling of positive, it's energizing, it's believed within coping mechanisms, like it's something we can handle. I was really intrigued by this because I had never heard about it. And we've talked about this, Sheila, about people becoming completely paralyzed with fear and doing nothing. And I know I felt like this several times in my own life. Like it took me years to launch Share Yoga and this online business. And if you could share with our listeners, what one step could we take when we intuitively know we need to do something, but we have no clue how to start? I know that's kind of a difficult question, but do you have any suggestions for that?
We intuitively know we need to do something.
I mean, how many times? I've sat there going, I know I need to do this. Why aren't I doing it?
I think that so the eustress and the distress, the way that I explain that is internal versus external.
Okay.
Stress / motivation, right? So if you have the intuition that you need to do something, I like to talk about being instead of doing a lot. Just be with it, maybe journal about it. I use a process called modeling where we, let's say the thing you want to do is start a podcast, right? But you have a feeling about it. And the feeling is fear and excitement, because those feelings feel the same in our body, fear and excitement. The sensation in your body is very similar, right? So, but we think that those sensations are because of the circumstance of starting a podcast. But we forget there's a step in there. You have a thought about it. This is going to be hard. What are people going to think? I don't know if I can do it. I have to learn all this new stuff. Those thoughts are what's causing the emotional response. So when we can really be quiet and ask ourselves, what am I thinking about this? And I love to ask myself this question, like, it's hard, right? Let's say that's one of the thoughts. Then I follow it up with, so what? So what? Like, we take ourselves so seriously, right? Try it. See how this relates. But when I work with people who are going through divorce and then they're ready to like start dating at some point, I give them this challenge. I'm like, I want you to go on 100 dates.
Oh God.
I want you to go on 100 dates.
That's torture.
No, because we are serial monogamists and we date one person until it reaches the end. That's like what we do. And it's so serious right from the beginning. We take ourselves we want to look the best and talk, all that stuff. If you're going on 100, there's going to be some that you're like, oh, my friend just texted me, I have an emergency, right? And you're going to book. Some you're going to be friends with. Some you might be interested in continuing a relationship with, right? So it's less serious.
Yeah.
And then takes 99 failures to succeed one time. Say that over and over and over, right? Handstand 99 times.
Yeah. And
I did 100. Yeah. I did 100 handstands a day for 30 days. I think it was some challenge. It was craziness, but I could do a handstand now. Yeah. Right. It's just like anything.
Yeah. Practice. That's what practice is.
And don't take life so seriously.
Yeah. Well, that's a good piece of advice. Thank you. I know that when you go to Sheila's website, which we will share with you, and we send out the replay and everything, that she has a great workbook. When you go to her website, it's a free workbook. It's called Embracing Change with Joy Workbook. And I've looked at it. It's awesome. So it's sheiladarling.com/home, but we're going to send the link and all of Sheila's links so you can get that resource. And thank you and also where you can find out how to work with Sheila. And is that the only place I can find you for consultation? Is on the one site, sheiladarling.com?
Yeah, my phone number's on there. I have a Facebook page, Sheila Darling Counseling, I think in coaching?
Yeah, I think it is because I've put it in several times. Yes.
Because you can't change the name,
Yeah,
more than
yeah.
once or something. So I had to just add the coaching on there.
No, it's
Couldn't
it's
take
good.
so.
It's a great site. It's good.
Oh,
And
thanks.
I want to thank you, but I have one final question for you and for our listeners as well, that you can ruminate on this. Typically when we're asked, with all that you've learned and you know up to now, what would you tell your younger self? But I want to shift that and reframe it and ask, knowing all that you've learned and experienced and learned over your past 5, 6, 7 decades, what would you like to tell your future self?
Trust yourself.
Trust.
You know.
Yeah, that's
You
a
do
great
know.
one. Mm-hmm. I
You
agree with
do
you.
know. I do talk about this all the time. People will say, I don't know. And I come back with, if you did know, what would the answer be?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Right. And when you ask yourself that over and over, it's the whole intuition, trusting yourself,
Mm-hmm.
being quiet, all of that. Yeah, it all
Yes.
comes full circle, doesn't it?
It does. It does. Thanks so much for listening. You can find me and subscribe for more youthful and healthy information on my website, shareyogawithmj.offeringtree.com. Or if you know how to navigate social media, find me on Facebook /Mary Jane Waddell. That's Jane with a Y, Jayne. And Instagram @Mary Jane Waddell. Remember, Jane with a Y. Now, this podcast would not be possible without my youthful older producer, editor, and creative friend, Andrea Canny. And you can find Andrea at Andrea Canny, that's CANNY.com. And of course, thanks to my generous guests who've shared their time and youthful wisdom. Remember, the Youthful Older Yogi podcast is presented solely for educational, inspirational, and entertainment purposes. It's not intended as a substitute for a physician or other qualified professionals. Okay, yogis, stay well and stay youthful.